dealing with in-group altruism and out-group violence. I usually refer to these as extreme social behaviors because out of the context of social behavior, altruism, in-group altruism, out-group violence are actually don't seem actually advantageous in simple natural selection. They're more useful in social behavioral circumstances. Altruism is an individual sacrificing their own fitness for the fitness of another individual without expecting any benefits. Altruism usually doesn't hold up under scrutiny in the natural world. We do see instances in human beings, but the definition is still pretty vague. There's certain offshoots of altruism, such as kin selection, where we sacrifice our fitness for our kin, and reciprocal altruism, which is what I'll be focusing on mainly here. Which reciprocal altruism is doing like favors for another individual with the expectation of getting return favors back in the future. In social groups like this, it tends to lead to a somewhat stable interaction between all the group members where there's a lot of cooperation and some competition. It doesn't necessarily result in a completely cooperative situation because everybody's trying to get out their own stuff. The other extreme social behavior is out-group violence, which is what I define as being violence towards another group of conspecifics, or the same species, that usually leads to lethality. Lethality in conspecific competition usually isn't common because it comes with a lot of risk. If you're trying to kill someone, there's a chance that you could be killed as well. However, in this sort of out-group violence, it's usually one large group targeting on smaller groups from another group. It's really, I'll go into more detail when we get to chimpanzees, but it can range from anywhere from the border patrol parties seen in chimpanzees to warfare and genocide seen in humans. I believe our extreme social behaviors in these two categories can be better understood in the light of the behavior of our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees and bonobos. Because they are our closest living relatives, and I believe that a lot of our social behavior evolved in circumstances similar to their social behavior. Here's a picture, chimpanzee on the left, bonobo on the right. Chimpanzees are usually a bit bigger, bonobos are a bit smaller and have more, they look a bit more like humans in the face than chimpanzees do. Humans and the genus Pan, which both chimpanzees and bonobos belong to, split about 6 to 7 million years ago. Chimpanzees and bonobos split as a species from 2 to 2.5 billion years ago. They're characterized by having fission-fusion groups, which means that they're continuously forming subgroups and splitting from them within their community. The subgroups can be as small as pairs to as large as hunting and foraging parties, which can be upwards more of 10 or 15, depending on the size of the actual community itself. Chimpanzees are usually characterized by their male dominance hierarchies within their social groups, and they're out in conflict. They're well known for going out and killing other chimpanzees from separate groups. The females in chimpanzees are usually ranked lower than males, and they usually do not form coalitions like males do. Bonobos, however, female dominance is the rule. The females usually run the social group. Males also have a dominance hierarchy, but the dominance hierarchy in both sexes overall is not as strict as in chimpanzees. And they're also known for the complex sexual behavior. Most social interactions in bonobos begins with sexual interactions between all the sexes, which is actually really kind of cool. I think it's important when studying behavior to consider the biopsychology going along with the behavior because they're closely intertwined. You can't separate your biopsychology from your behavior. So I'm going to talk about some of the biopsychology of us and chimpanzees and bonobos first. The first of which is the Machiavellian intelligence model, which basically states that social living has driven the evolution of larger neocortex size, that's like this part of your brain, and more specialized intelligence dealing with social behavior. Mostly this has to do with the expression and interpretation of emotions and emotional cues. Two areas where you can see more development in humans and chimps and bonobos is in the facial nucleus of the pons, which regulates spontaneous expression of emotions, and then also the facial movement area of the primary motor cortex is more specialized, which allows for greater control of your facial expressions. This model is very relevant to especially reciprocal altruism. It's called the event feature emotion complexes. Deals with the prefrontal, frontal lobes, the temporal lobe, and the limbic and paralimbic systems. The prefrontal and frontal cortex is important in planning for future occurrences, storing long-term goals, and emotional inhibition. Lesions or damage to these areas causes irrational behavior, lack of caring about future consequences, and inappropriate responses to social cues. There's two specific areas, areas 10 and 13 within these lobes. That 10 has to do with future planning, and 13 has to do with the connection from the prefrontal to the limbic areas. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the orbital frontal cortex are also associated with these areas. The temporal lobe is important in storing memories. Specifically, the superior temporal sulcus is involved with memories of social cues, such as facial expressions, gaze, prosody, tone of voice, and posture and gestures. The limbic and paralimbic systems deal with emotions and are usually cued by the STS, the superior temporal sulcus. Here's a diagram of these important areas. On the left side, the yellowy peach area is the frontal and prefrontal, where on the left is just the prefrontal. Areas 10 and 13 are marked by numbers 10 and 13. The anterior temporal lobe is brown. The superior temporal sulcus is the peach area along the side. And then the green area is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the orbital frontal cortex. Okay, now that we've talked about the biopsychology of it, I want to talk about specific behaviors that go along with reciprocal altruism. The first of which is emotional inhibition, which is important in maintaining social relationships. If you react immediately to every single emotional cue, you're probably going to damage your social relationships, and that's not good in a group like a fission fusion society where relationships need to be flexible. And it's shown that apes and monkeys with fission fusion groups, including chimpanzees and bonobos, do better on tasks that require inhibition. Another way of emotional inhibition is conflict behavior, post-conflict behavior such as grooming and play, which kind of ease tensions among the group. Humans tend to have more patience and emotional inhibition, especially when it comes to certain things like money, which is shown because they actually have a larger area 10 in the prefrontal cortex, which deals with emotional inhibition. In chimpanzees, their emotional inhibition is not very good. They're very intolerant of other members of the group unless they've had previous coalitions with them. They'll typically monopolize a reward in a task, in a cooperative task. They will cooperate, but they typically don't share the rewards with their the members of the pair. And they make efforts to avoid each other in stressful situations, such as co-feeding when they're actually in strong competition for food at the time. Bonobos, however, will readily cooperate not only in pairs, but in groups of 3 as well, and they'll engage in a lot of play and social interaction during stressful situations. Which is interesting because bonobos actually have a larger area 13, which is the connection between the prefrontal cortex and your limbic system, so they seem to have more emotional inhibition in that way. The next area I want to talk about is the theory of mind, which is actually really interesting and not quite well known. That's the ability to be aware of another individual's state of mind, to be able to consider what another person is thinking. Chimpanzees are okay with this in the context of cooperation. They're able to use knowledge of whatever someone else knows when they want to compete with them for resources. Like subordinate chimpanzees, when they know the dominant does not know where the location of food is hidden, they'll go in and get it then, but not when the other person, not when the other individual knows what the food actually is. Bonobos, however, there's not much research towards bonobos, but they will engage in shared intentionality and a playing goal where they'll work together without a lot of communication. They'll read each other's social cues and be able to tell what the other individual is trying to do and work with them towards a shared goal. The problem with theory of mind, it's very vague. We don't really even know how it works well in humans. So we're kind of making conjectures about what chimpanzees and bonobos do. They also could be reacting to behavioral rules and social rules instead of individual cues given off by whoever they're working with. Another thing that they're not able to do that we are is they can't understand when an individual is misinformed about information and take advantage of that. They're able to tell when someone is ignorant of information, but not when they have the wrong knowledge. Children are actually able to do that, so that's one thing that's really better. Outward violence, like I said earlier, lethality is not typical in most conflicting interactions between groups. However, chimpanzees are known to form border patrol groups that will go out on the edges of their territory, and it seems the only purpose of this is to find individuals or pairs from separate groups and attack them and typically kill them. A great example of this are the Kasekala and Kahama groups from Gombe in Nigeria. They were originally one entire group of chimpanzees, but they ended up splitting. I'm not sure why. I think it was for resource competition. But all the groups in the Kasekala killed all the males in the Kahama group within 3 years. And these were males that they had previously formed coalitions with. Bonobos, from what we've seen from bonobos, they usually will interact peacefully with other groups of bonobos. There has been some research on the tensions between groups where they will vocally signal at each other, and they'll come in contact somewhat violently, but it's rarely injurious. However, it's more likely to see these groups interacting in such a way where they'll interact peacefully. The groups will mingle, they'll groom, they'll mate, they'll engage in that sexual behavior I was talking about previously. Okay. I can wrap it up. What I want to say at the end is we have to be careful about comparing our behaviors now with behaviors in chimpanzees and bonobos, because we aren't chimpanzees and bonobos. We no longer exist in those small groups like hunter-gatherers like we evolved in, and like they operate in. We're in a much more larger, global actually community where we're aware of other groups. So you have to be careful not to say, well, since that's how we evolved, that's how we're going to act. We are able to overcome our evolutionary behavioral drives and go past that.
Great, so now we have the reason I kind of go out the door. So we have an opportunity.